So Kim, the night manager, went on maternity leave, and her husband.
Okay. So the first two types of learning that we're going to discuss in the class are classical and operant conditioning. And if you remember, classical conditioning was the Pavlovian dog and salivation study, which we'll go over here in just a minute. But it is where we really don't have to behave in a certain way to learn something. So, for example, a child who fears the doctor's office be so because of the experience of pain of a shot. Or I always think of a dentist drill. Every time I hear a dentist drill, my teeth kind of cringe, even though there's no drill there. I could just hear it on a TV or something. And then operant conditioning. So this is what's known as associative learning. Okay. Operant conditioning is when we have to perform some type of behavior and we use the consequence of that behavior to determine if we'll do it more or less in the future. This is the classical reward and punishment, right? And so let's take a closer look at these two types of learning and kind of some of the nuances behind them. So as I mentioned, the classic study done by Ivan Pavlov um, dealt with, he was studying the digestive system of dogs, and he wanted to know if the intensity of the smell of food created more salivation in his eyes, the correlate of hunger versus less intense. So he had different intensities of dog food or dog powder is what he actually used. And of course, food naturally produces salivation. When you have food near you, you will naturally start to salivate. Okay. For this, if we start with this, this is what's called this UCS stands for unconditional stimulus. So food elicits an unconditioned response, salivation. Okay. Now, again, as the I think more of the fairy tale goes, the fairy tale goes one day he recognized that one of his dogs started to salivate even though there was no presence of food. And he got really curious, why are these dogs salivating but there's no food that is being presented to them? And he recognized that a certain dog would start to salivate when his feeder was just the person who fed him was just walking through the lab with the footsteps, just the footsteps. Once the dog heard the footsteps, the dog would start to salivate. And he was kind of like, well, that shouldn't be happening because it's not the stimulus that naturally elicits salivation. Okay. So he came up with a way of testing this where he took a neutral stimuli. In this case, he used a bell that doesn't create that natural response of salivation. Okay. And in the classical study, what he did is he paired the bell with the food over and over and over until this neutral stimuli produce the salivation on its own without the presentation of the food. So when the bell created salivation, this is called a conditioned stimulus, and the salivation it created is a conditioned response. Okay. So this is the idea behind classical or what's known as associative learning. As you noted, the dog did not need to behave in certain way in order to salivate or not. It was just the association between the bell and the food that then the bell could create salivation on its own. Okay. Hence, when we see the golden arches, we think of having a Big Mac or fries and those kinds of things. Those golden arches really are a neutral stimulus. They really represent nothing to do with food, but we've associated it enough that when we see it, we think of, Big Macs and kids' meals and all of those kinds of things. And we start to, well, if you like McDonald's, you start to salivate. Okay. And that's just an example. Okay. So I mentioned we'd watch a little video again on the little Albert experiments at the beginning of the semester. And this is just a way of demonstrating, again, classical conditioning. I want you to note that little Albert's fear response did not require little Albert to act in some certain way. He just associated the white rat with that startling bang behind his head. And this is kind of the results of that. Whoops.
To prove that environment is more powerful than genetics, Watson designs an experiment for an infant known as Little Albert. He's so confident, he films it for posterity. At first, Albert shows little fear, even when Watson places a burning newspaper in front of him. Albert is also unafraid when he encounters a white rat for the first time in his life. But then Watson shows Albert the rat accompanied by a loud clanging noise. One of the few things that upsets little Albert. And he does it again. And does it again. Eventually, Albert learns to fear not just the rat, but all furry things, even without the loud noise. In Watson's mind, the Little Albert experiment is a success because it proves that fears are learned, not inherited.
Okay. So that was just a little reminder of the little Albert experiments. There's a lot of ethical things with that study because they never actually helped him get over his fear. And I believe the last anyone heard of him, he died at the age of 11. So we never really know what happened to little Albert. But to go on from that, it was a good example of what happens when two fear naturally provoking stimulus is paired with a neutral stimulus. Okay. And so let's kind of go through this because I mentioned that one of the best treatments for fears and anxieties is exposure therapy. Okay. So we know that when we pair the conditioned stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus, we have this high learning curve, right? So let's say, um, let me think. Okay, I'm going to use the boyfriend girlfriend example. Okay, so you pair some hunky looking guy or cute girl or whoever you're attracted to with those emotions and love and their physical attributions. And so you have the pairing of the unconditioned stimulus, love, and feelings of needing for bond with your conditioned stimulus, that cute person, we'll say beautiful person in your eyes, okay? And those become paired. And so those feelings tend to be associated with you. And so you get a high response of a conditioned response, which would be loving, caring, those kinds of those things you do in an intimate relationship, okay? But then the infatuation kind of ends. Maybe they change their behaviors and everything else, and those feelings that you originally had um, are no longer there, and now you're just being exposed to that conditioned stimulus, that person, and so your feelings and emotion go extinct. Okay, and you're going through, and so those emotions and feelings go away. So right here you break up with them, right? Because those feelings are no longer paired with each other. Okay. But then let's say there's a rest period where you're not exposed to Mr. X Charming, and one day You walk into Bash's at Sale or the local grocery store, and there he is. And for some reason, all of a sudden you start to feel something and you go, I wonder why I ever broke up with him or her. Oh, I just remember all these good times and all these good feelings. And what do we usually mistakenly do? We go and talk to them. Okay. And here we have what's known as spontaneous recovery. After a period of time not being exposed to that conditioned stimulus, you can get a spontaneous return of those emotional feelings through just mere exposure to that individual. And all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, why did I break up with them? He or she's are so cute. And oh, I remember how funny they were, and all those emotions, all those unconditioned responses and stimulus return. And what do? We usually make the mistake of going and talking to the person, and but fortunately we it quickly wanes off, I hope. We don't get through that, we don't start back over here, but hopefully it just wanes off and it goes away. Okay, this is the way to kind of think about associative learning, that, and this is why things like exposure therapy work for things like post-traumatic stress disorder, phobias, and whatnot. And I'll take you through a basic extinction protocol. Let's say you have a severe fear of snakes and you want to get rid of that fear. You're just like, it's nonsense. I live in the desert. I'm scared to go outside. Maybe it's that kind of situation where you're just so fearful of snakes. So what you would happen if you went into a therapeutic kind of setting is they would measure some physiological response to stress. So increased heart rate, blood pressure, whatever it may be. Okay, skin, sweating, maybe. And what they would do is they would slowly expose you to the idea of snakes. So maybe they would start with you thinking about snakes. And then they, before going on, they'd wait for for you not to have a physiological response to thinking about snakes. And then let's say the next protocol would be showing you pictures of snakes on a computer screen and continually exposing those to you until again you no longer have a physiological response. And then maybe they have you sit outside a room where a snake is in the other room, and they do the same thing. And then they put you in the room with the snake and do the same thing. And then they put the snake, so let's say the snake was in a cage, they take the snake out of the cage, and so it's free roaming, and they wait for your physiological response to go down. Okay, that's the idea of extinction, is continually pairing that conditioned stimulus, in this case the snake, to the individual until they no longer have an anxiety response to them. Okay. Now I will tell you, this works really well with basic phobias. It works really well with contained post-traumatic stress disorders such as combat PTSD. It works well with acute trauma PTSD. It is much more difficult to use these types of treatment with chronic issues such as social anxiety, um, tra- uh, um, um, trauma that has been going on for a long period of time, because the situation has become much, much more complex. So, for example, someone with a social phobia, social anxiety, um, they have they've generalized their phobia so much that you would have to go expose that individual to so many social settings in order for them to alleviate their fear response. It would take a lifetime to extinguish something like a social phobia or something dealing with chronic trauma where that trauma is generalized to so many different settings. So it works really good with acute, specific types of traumas and those kinds of things. Not so well with more complex, where there's several unconditioned stimuluses and conditioned stimuluses that have been paired together. Okay, so it does get a little bit more complex. I just kind of gave a simple version of that. But these are some examples of classical conditioning, and yes, believe it or not, if you want your new love relationship for them to get over their exes quicker, is it a good idea to rip up all of the pictures and everything else? No, it's actually not. It's a good idea to keep those pictures up so that that isn't paired and that that behavior extinguishes, that eventually the person just goes and throws away the picture themselves instead of you doing it, because they no longer produce that feeling by looking at that picture anymore. Something to consider as you're looking at relationships. Okay. So now this is different from operant conditioning, getting into B.F. Skinner and the like. Okay. This is in operant condition, the main part is right here, the behavioral response. It requires you to behave in some way, hence the term operant. Okay, so we have some event, some stimulus, we have a behavior, and then if that behavior is positively is reinforced, or to use the more used term, rewarded, it increases the probability of the behavior in the future. If the behavior is punished, it theoretically reduces the probability of behavior in the future. Okay. Now, this is where students really have a difficult time with this idea, the difference between positive, negative reinforcement and positive and negative punishment, because you're tempted to put emotions into it. Okay. But when you're looking at operant condition, when we talk about positive, we're not talking about positive experience, positive emotions. We're talking about something was added to the situation. So, for example, a kiddo picks up their toy, mom gives the child a treat. Okay. So that's adding something to the situation that is reinforcing. Negative is we're going to take something away. All right. So, an example of negative reinforcement is you burnt the toast, the smoke detector goes off, you leave the house so you don't hear the smoke detector anymore. That taking away of that noxious noise is reinforcing. Okay. And then again, when we're talking about positive punishment, negative punishment, we're talking about something adding to the situation or taking away. So positive punishment is the classical example of spanking a child. You're adding something negative to the situation that reduces the chances of the behavior. Negative punishment is you're going to take something away. So the classical example is when the teenager comes in late for curfew, you take away their car keys, or you take away their PlayStation or Xbox, and that puts them in a, again, negative state, which theoretically reduces the chance that they'll be late in the future. I'm hoping most of the parents in the room are laughing because you know that this doesn't always work the way we expect it to. Okay, so just to kind of give some more example, so we have positive reinforcement. You turn in your homework, you get praise, so something's added, so you increase turning in your homework on time. Okay. Negative reinforcement, you turn your homework in time, the teacher stops criticizing you for your late work. So you increase turning in your homework in the future. Okay. If we look at it from the punishment side, you don't clean up your room when your parents ask, your parents yell at you, so they add something yelling about you cleaning your room, so you stop dawdling and clean up your room. Okay. You come home 2 hours late. Again, this is the example. You get grounded. You're taken away. Your freedom is taken away for 2 weeks, and so you're less likely to not come in at curfew later again. Okay. Okay. So I want to go back and just emphasize, just like I did with classical conditioning, extinction, and all those things, to add in some of the complexities of these things. Because these types of learnings do not necessarily occur on the conscious level. In fact, they occur within the limbic system. That's where most operant and classical conditioning occurs, in that sub-unconscious areas of the brain that give away to emotions and all of those types of things. So, sorry, I had to take a drink. Um, it's soda. Um, so I always like to talk about the issue of tantrum behavior. And so you have a kiddo, let's say, and a mom, and the kiddo throws a tantrum in the grocery store and he really wants a candy bar. And so he flails and he yells and he screams and he does all these things, hits and knocks things off the wall. What is mom likely to do to save the embarrassment? She's likely to give the candy bar. Okay. Now, I want to be careful in this situation because there's two people being reinforced in this situation. Okay. There's two people that are learning something. The child is being positively reinforced for, let's say, his behavior. Let's use a his. Okay. Because he gets the candy bar. Mom is being negatively reinforced because the child's tantrum negative behaviors are taken away, and that's reinforcing for mom. So we have two people who are learning this behavior, and 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 this is why tantrum behavior is so hard to correct, because it's not just the child who is being rewarded for that tantrum. Mom is too. And in fact, in studies where children are first counter conditioned to do tantrums, so the child's no longer doing tantrum behaviors. You want to know what we find when we record mom going through the candy store, through the grocery store? She actually passes by that candy bar 5 times more. She will actually take her grocery cart and push it closer to the candy bar than she did before. What is she trying to do unconsciously? She's trying to engage that child into that tantrum behavior because there was a reinforcement for it for her in the past. So the thing we have learned when we're helping parents with tantrums is you both have to train the child in the parent and extinguish the behavior for the child in the parent, because they're both in a reinforcement position when it deals with tantrums. Okay, and this is also why um, children. So we talked about generalization in place, right? This is also why children might only throw a tantrum at bashes, but they might not throw it at the Circle K or the Walmart or the whatever, the tantrums tend to be place specific. And it's also why tantrum behaviors may only occur with mom, but they don't occur with grandma or auntie or whoever else that's around the child. And they're all going, we don't know why you can't handle this child. It's because two people are being rewarded in a specific situation that is reinforcing for both of them. Okay, so there's something to consider if you have a child or you know someone who struggles with children who have tantrums and those kinds of things. Okay, now let's go to the punishment end. And the example I like to use is a teenager going beyond curfew. Okay, so what do we tell our teenagers? So we say, if you're not home by, let's say, at 11, we're going to take your um, Xbox away. I don't even, I, I'm so old. Do they still make Xboxes? Or am I that old? I don't know. Can someone kind of tell me if I should change the, okay, I'm seeing a yes. All right. So you threaten to take away the kid's Xbox, okay? But here is the thing that breaks all of these rules, and parents in the room who have been kind of laughing and saying these things don't really work, let's explain why, okay? Because we're human beings that when in any point in this situation you implement the opportunity of choice, all the laws and rules that govern operant conditioning are out the window. So let me bring up our teenager again. So our teenager is at a party and it's hitting, 10, let's say 10:30, okay? He's been drinking this elixir out of this red plastic cup and is feeling really good based on that quote unquote punch. And there's these really cute girls that have been paying attention to him all night. And on the games, he's like rocking it. He's like level 20 on a game that he's never got beyond level 10. And he's just banging it, man. There I am. Okay. Now, this kid is probably thinking, I'm supposed to be home at 11. I get my Xbox taken away 2 weeks, but oh my gosh, how much fun, positive reinforcement am I experiencing right now? I have the cutest girl at school paying attention to me. This red juice is really, really good. I'm really hot on this game. I'm doing really good. Do you think that teenager is going to go, okay, I better hang up. I have a 20-minute drive to get home. Um, I'll, 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 I'll stop now. I don't want my Xbox taken away. No, no, let's be realistic. Unless it's a highly anxious child, they're gonna be late beyond curfew. Reason being is the parent, and I'm not saying this isn't, I'm just going to say this. The parent broke the rules of operant conditioning by implementing the idea of choice. Okay. What the parent probably should have said at the beginning of saying, okay, be home at 11, is when the teenager said, or what, they should have said, you'll find out. That's a lot different than we're going to take away your Xbox. Okay. The child doesn't know. It's very ambiguous what really is going to happen if I'm late. And mom said that really seriously. Okay. That's one way you can make operant conditioning work, is not do the element of choice. With little children, the mistake we make is the cute little things on the wall where you put the sticker, the smiley faces, and if the kids get so many smiley faces, they get a pizza, right? Well, if the smiley faces are based on cleaning up a toy, but I, as a little boy am or girl, am really having fun in my imagination playing with that toy, and I get to choose a pizza 5 days from now, or enjoying that toy right here, right now, guess what the little kiddo's gonna choose? Okay. So here's the issue that we make the most mistakes, and why a lot of parents laugh through these presentations until we get to the end. The reason why reinforcement and punishment do not work is because with human beings, if you implement choice, then these rules go out the window. They don't work. Okay. If you want them to work, you mold their behaviors. And when you see the behaviors you want, you reinforce them. When you see the behaviors you don't want, you punish them. But you don't tell the person what you're looking for as far as positive or negative behaviors. Okay. So if you want to, and I know that the issue is that then we get into ethics, right? Because that sounds very deceptive. But that's how we train our dogs. That's how we train our cats, our domesticated animals. You don't go and tell your dog, if you go do this, I will give you a treat, right? That's not how you train a dog. And the same rules apply to human beings. Okay. Anyways, I just wanted to point that out. And this is the importance of cognition with humans, and how we and why these things, classical and operant conditioning, don't always work with humans. Because once you implement the issue of choice, which happens in that frontal cortical areas of the brain, these rules go out the window. Okay, so I just wanted to point those out. I know I emphasized them a little too much, but I just wanted to point those out. Okay. I also want to point out different, what are called curves of learning. Okay. And the two terms I want you to really understand is the term interval versus ratio. Ratio is the number of times a behavior is committed. Okay. Interval is based upon time. All right. So what is the best way to train a behavior is when a reward or punishment is what's called variable ratio. Okay. And this is the basis of gambling. And this is why it's so easy to get someone addicted to the slot machines. Is that instead of a fixed ratio, so each time the person does the behavior, they get a reward. Okay. That's a fixed ratio. Or maybe every third time they get a reward. Okay. It's fixed. Every certain amount of behaviors, you get your reward. Okay. On a variable ratio, maybe you get it every third time, every fifth time, first time, second time, but you never know when you're actually going to get that reward. All right. And this is kind of the idea behind gambling and slot machines. You don't know which time you pull that lever, you're going to get that reward. All right. This is called variable ratio. It is the basis of gambling addiction. It's the basis of even intimate relationships. So, in this situation, when you get intimate every single time, the person just knows it, and so they don't have to perform a certain behavior. They just know it's fixed. But if it's variable, sometimes when you do something nice for me, you get it, and sometimes you don't. you increase the chances that they'll do that behavior more often. Okay. All right, so that's ratio type of schedule. The second type of schedule is a variable ratio, what's called variable interval. Okay, so let's go to the fixed interval. And this one is much like paychecks. Let's say you get paid every 2 weeks. Okay, what we find is when we're paid every on a fixed interval schedule, we get what's called a scallop. So we get paid, and our performance flatlines until it gets closer to the next payday, and then our performance increases. And then our performance, so if it's two, let's say we're paid on 2 weeks. So we get paid on Friday. Our performance the next week is just kind of like mediocre. But then that week just before payday, our performance will increase. So we end up with this scallop type of situation. Now, I would not like this with paychecks. This is not something I'm advocating for in order to keep performance steady. But on a variable interval, it's when you don't know when you're going to get paid, but it's based on time. So maybe you're paid every 1 week, maybe you're paid every 2 weeks, maybe you're paid every 3 weeks, but it creates this flat line of performance, not as high as the variable ratio or the fixed ratio, but it creates this steady line of performance. Okay. So when you think about training your cats and your dogs and your boyfriends and girlfriends, these are some different type of schedules of reinforcement that maybe you should consider. Um, again, based on time or based on number of times a behavior is performed. Okay? All right. Let's get now to our last type of learning, which in here it's called observational learning. It's also called social learning. And this is where we're going to bring the mind back into the equation of behavior. Because as I mentioned on last Thursday, the unique thing about observational class/social learning, we'll call it social learning from here on out, is it requires you to attend to a bunch of different behaviors that result in the same thing. And then it requires you to have some type of retention of that. And then between retention and motor reproduction, you have to decide how you're going to go about that behavior. Okay, so maybe a example is building a bookshelf. You know how they come um, in just boxes and you have to put them together. And let's say with your bookcase, it didn't come with the instructions. So you go on YouTube and you watch, like, let's say 3 videos on how to put this bookshelf together. So you got to pay attention. You have to retain each 3. And then somewhere between retention and motor production, you have to decide how you're going to go about building that bookshelf. Okay. And then after that, if the bookshelf stays up, it holds the books, you're reinforced for it. You're good to go. Your roommates or your family are like, yes, good job. Or it falls apart. Then you've learned, oh, I need to start over. Again, let's begin this again. Okay. Again, it begins with observing others' behaviors and then recreating how you're going to go about it and then doing it and seeing if it works. Okay. And so let's go again with what I started with last Thursday with the classical Bobo doll studies, where a teacher in the first day in front of different students was either aggressive or non-aggressive with a Bobo doll. And then the next day they observed how the children behaved, whether they'd be aggressive or non-aggressive. We'll start with this video and then we'll go from there.
The model pummeled the doll with the mallet, flung it in the air, kicked it repeatedly, threw it down and beat it. It was once widely believed that seeing others vent aggression would drain the viewer's aggressive drive. As you can see, exposure to aggressive modeling is hardly cathartic. Exposure to aggressive modeling increased attraction to guns, even though it was never modeled. Guns had less appeal to children who had no exposure to the aggressive modeling. The children also picked up the novel hostile language.
Mm-hmm. All right, so that is some classical video of the Bobo doll experiments. And this is the part that usually it gets advertised. This is on popular media. It's what you'll see on Psychology Today websites, on Simple Psychology, on aggressioninchildren.com websites, is this portion of the experiment that on day one, there you either had a non-aggressive model or an aggressive model, and on the following day, they have just observed the children's behavior, and of course, the children with the aggressive model were more aggressive, as indicated by the plus sign, and the children who had the non-aggressive model were less aggressive or not aggressive at all, indicated by the negative sign. But this is the complexity of the Bobo doll experiments that you'll probably only learn in a psychology class, or if you do the investigation on your own, is that the Bobo doll experiments was actually what is known as a 2-by-2 experiment. Okay, 2-by-2 means that you have two conditions on day one and two conditions on day two. Okay, so let's go through this. On day one, the child a child is either exposed to an aggressive teacher or a non-aggressive teacher. On day two, the child then is randomly assigned to be with then either another aggressive teacher or a non-aggressive teacher. Okay. So this is the complexity of this study, which makes these issues more complex than what we would think. A child who observed a teacher, and it looks like I better put this in a different color. A child who on day one was exposed to an aggressive teacher, and on day two was exposed then again to another aggressive teacher, was not or less aggressive by the negative sign. So the continuation of being exposed to an aggressive teacher resulted in non-aggressive behavior. Okay. Now, this is the part of the experiment that is often advertised. On day one, they were exposed to the aggressive teacher, but the next day they were exposed to a non-aggressive teacher. The child's aggression went up. It increased. Okay. Now let's add the next level of complexity to the Bobo doll experiment. Children who were exposed to the non-aggressive teacher, but then were exposed to an aggressive teacher the following day, guess what? Their aggression went up. They were more aggressive. Okay. Now, those non-aggressive the students that were uh, exposed to the non-aggressive teacher on day one and the non-aggressive teacher on day two, theirs stayed the same or went down. Their aggression went down. So here's the complexity, and this is something that we should know when, for example, we foster a child who came from an aggressive, abusive home, or mom and dad can't handle their aggressive tendencies of their child. And so they send them to your home. You should expect that child's aggression to increase, not decrease. Okay? Especially if those parents were aggressive and abusive. Okay? So a safe home actually increases aggression when a child comes from an aggressive, abusive home. This is something that I very often taught to newly foster parents and adoptive parents who are adopting abused children out of the foster system, that you should expect them to act out, be more aggressive, be more angry. Just because you give them a safe environment, that's a safe environment for them to then act out what they have learned from their previous environment. Okay, this is also why children who are continually exposed to aggressive parents, they tend not to be aggressive. They tend to be the child in the back of the classroom who are quiet, who are shy, who don't do much of anything. They tend to be the child that is in this situation if all the red flags are in place. Okay. And again, if we go down here, right? So non-aggressive in one day, why does that create aggression in the next day? Well, I want you to think about this. We've talked about Freudian theory about aggression, anger, destruction. That is a natural propensity for children to experience. If they're put out of that non-aggressive model, but now they have a teacher or a person in their life going, hey, this is how we can act out, we can do what we want, that child is going to do what we call with teenagers, experiment. They're going to go experience something they haven't experienced. Okay. And so a lot of teenagers who come from safe, clean homes and then they're put in an aggressive environment, such as gang affiliation, a poor school, a poor thing, it shouldn't be surprising that we see their aggression increase. We see their antisocialness increase, even though they come from that safe environment. Okay. And then, of course, it shouldn't be surprising if environments are consistent. A non-aggressive put in a non-aggressive will create non-aggression. Okay. So this is the complexity of the Bobo doll experiments, is that it's not a simple, you expose a child to violence, they'll be violent. No, it all depends upon the environment after that exposure. What do parents and communities do with that aggression? and whatnot. Okay. And I hope this brings out, because we'll be talking about these things like antisocial psychopathologies, personality factors, and all of these things. And we will come back to this social learning example time and time again. Okay. And so let me see. Let me make sure we got through everything. I didn't want to talk. We're not going to talk. We got that. Okay, we're right here. I think we did it, gang. All right.